Okay, so a bit about myself. I started to tell you a little bit, but I have over 25 years experience working in aerospace. And I started out as a mechanical engineer, and I started out in manufacturing in a development program. And right when I started at Pratt and Whitney, they had just hired the Shingizutsu Corporation to start helping them do Kaizen events in Middletown. So the Shingizutsu had done a few events in East Hartford and in North Haven, but I was fortunate enough to be the guinea pig that they threw at the very first Kaizen event for the Middletown plant. Um, so in the Middletown plant, they did all the final assembly and test of the engines before they shipped them. And the compression systems module center was also based there. And I spent the 13 years of my career working in Pratt and Whitney, but 7 of those years were in the compression systems module center in engineering roles, in purchasing roles, and running Kaizen. So I built the Kaizen promotion office there and did a lot of the major transformations there. And then I also brought that experience with me to Sikorsky when I went there as a transformation manager, and then brought it to several other companies. And that after a while, I realized I kept repeating the same methodology over and over again every time I did a transformation. And what I was doing wasn't really being taught, even by the consultants that taught me. So I started putting curriculum together. And one day I decided to start my own business in 2016. So I was in business for 3.5 years. And then one of my clients offered me a job. So I moved to Long Island to take that job. It was putting me back into operations and a leadership role. And I felt it wouldn't hurt to go back and, sharpen the saw again. And I thought it would only help relevance, in my industry to have even more experience. Um, you know, and and I thought I'd want to go back and forth, keep doing that, but I think I'm kind of done. I think I just want to be an entrepreneur from now on out, here on out. Because I really do value the time off and the freedom that you get when you run your own business. I'm sure you can appreciate that too. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. My journey is the same way. I mean, you can always go back into the corporate world, a lot of great opportunities there. I mean, I think in the corporate world, you don't have to work as hard as you do as an entrepreneur, but there's a passion with being an entrepreneur that comes with it. And helping clients is really rewarding.
it's true. And you can, if you decide you want to take a month off and go
Mhm.
see the world, you can do that as an entrepreneur. It seems like it doesn't happen as much as you'd like it to because it's your baby. but
Mhm.
um but you have the ability to do that, which is nice. All right, so have you heard of the hockey stick?
To tell you the truth, like other than Six Sigma, I really haven't had a lot of formal training. A lot of this I learned on the job from uh, a lot of people that came from Toyota, from the automotive world.
Mhm.
So yeah, when it comes to some of this terminology, like I've seen it firsthand, but I'm not familiar with it. Mhm.
Okay, so the hockey stick actually doesn't have anything to do with lean. The hockey stick is
Mhm.
actually a phenomenon that happens in companies. And for you to understand if you've ever experienced this, if X is representing one customer shipment, do your shipments or have they ever looked like this each month? Where week 1 you're only getting a couple of shipments out, week 2 maybe one extra, week 3 more of the same, and then week 4 everything out the door. Everybody's
Oh
hair on
wow.
fire, everybody's stressed out. If you look at it
Mhm.
sideways, it looks like a hockey stick. That's how it got its name. You'd be
Gotcha.
surprised how many businesses run this way, and they're okay with it, you know. And so so what Zen Sales to Shipments does is it gets rid of this hockey stick. The hockey stick is a result of no level loading, no tack time, no pull systems, no cellular line manufacturing, Kanban, or multi-skilled operators. A company can say they're doing all these things, but if they have the hockey stick, they're not. Quite frankly, they're not. And this results in missed customer commits and employee burnout. So, I mean, as it is, people are looking for excuses to leave companies, right? The
Mhm.
Great Resignation, and they're after COVID, everybody's kind of done some soul searching internally to say, am I really happy? So they're not going to put up with this. So we really have to. There's so many reasons why we shouldn't be doing this.
And yeah, I can definitely give some feedback on the employee burnout. There's like nothing more frustrating for employees the when all of a sudden they have to produce more, and because they're looking at their leadership and saying like, well, how come last week, you had us sweeping the floor, but this week, like we're killing ourselves to get this order out. It's really demoralizing, and a lot of leaders that I mentor, like I teach them to basically not do that because of what happens with employees. So look for opportunities where you can build up whip and ways to get ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, they won't. Their best efforts won't get them there unless they make this type of change that I'm pitching here. So if you struggle with miss shareholder commits, we have a solution for that, and it's called SIOP. And SIOP is sales, inventory, and operations planning. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with the concept, the way you explained it in your podcast, and yeah, I've not used that acronym before, but yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so it's basically a team that meets on a regular basis, whether it be weekly, bi-weekly, once a month, but they're reviewing the lay of the land. They're looking at what's changed out in the marketplace. What are the customers going to be ordering next? What's our forecast looking like? And then how are we doing with deliveries? And how are we doing with the way that we produce our products? And understanding the way that production and operations operate. So a lot of times organizations are siloed, where not only are sales and operations doing separate things, not on the same page, but finance as well. So that hockey stick is a result of finance, sales, and operations not being on the same page. And they don't even know how to get on the same page because they don't have a system that they're all working within. So when you implement PSYOP, that gets you is met or exceeded commits. And if you also struggle with missed customer shipments, we have a solution for that, and it's an execution system. So that system I was referring to, that has to be built, that has to exist for you to be able to have an effective PSYOP team to know what to be interacting with and how. And what that will get you is 100% on-time delivery that obviously everybody shoots for to delight all their customers. If you struggle with escalating overhead costs due to high overtime and low turns, we also have a solution for that, and it's called standard work. And it's one of the major elements of the Toyota production system that I'll go into. And what that enables you to do is have lowered overhead costs, low to no overtime, and high turns. If you struggle with poor quality due to exhaustion, I mean, if you're overworking your people, they're going to make mistakes, and that's going to affect your quality. Or the loss of skilled labor because your exhausted people are quitting and moving someplace else where they can get the same money, if not more, without being exhausted. And then we have a solution for that, and that's no work, full work control, and multi-process handlers. No work, full work control enables you to have repetitive work and standard hours. So what is the Zen sales to shipment system? You must be curious by now, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so if this is a perfect factory, value stream map of a perfect factory, in a future state, if you will. What Zen Sales to Shipment is a production system that helps you create a Zen state all the way from sales to shipments. So Kanban, kitting, flow, Hijunka, pull, tact, PSYOP are all elements of this perfect factory. And they work in a certain fashion to be able to optimize what's happening in the on the production floor. So to implement this, we have a 5-phase process. There's an evaluate phase, a phase where we institute PSYOP if you don't have it. If you do have it, we're going to work with you to perfect it, and also later be able to link it to your transformation. Then we'll have a strategy phase, transform, and then Kaizen. Notice Kaizen appears last. Does that perplex you at all?
No, I mean, honestly, I think it would perplex most people. To me, it makes absolute sense because you have to establish the fundamentals first. Then you can continually improve and make the process better. But if you don't build out the fundamentals at first, it's kind of hard to continue to improve if you don't have standard work or you don't have any visibility to the forecasts from your customers. And you're just reacting. So to me, I really like this approach because yeah, I think most people will start with Kaizen, 5S, and lean. Look for the 8 ways. But yeah, I like the process that
Yeah.
first you build.
Yeah. So once you become an expert, I know a lot of people say don't call yourself an expert. It's like, well, when you've been doing it for over 20 years very successfully, you're an expert. When you become
Yeah.
an expert at doing this, you realize a Kaizen event is just training, right? You're just teaching people how to do Kaizen, right? But Kaizen is just continuous improvement. And continuous improvement means that I'm improving on something that exists. So if you don't have a lean factory, how can you do Kaizen? And Taiichi Ono used to say this by saying, without a standard, there can be no improvement. Right? It's the same
Makes
thing.
sense. Yeah.
So what they were, when the Shingizutsu was coming around and training people to try to understand how to become more like Toyota, they were actually seeing it as just training. They were coming in and training. And once you got it, like they'd say, Nicole's son, she gets it. It's like, once you get it, you just do it, right? You just implement it. So I used to use Kaizen events just to get the focus, the support, and the window of opportunity to get things done quickly. So one of the reasons why my business focuses on breakthrough transformation is because all of this stuff gets done up front, right? And it just looks like work, right? It looks like a project. And then when we actually go to implement it, it looks more like a Kaizen event, but it's still just training, right? Work. And then once you have this system all in place, that's when we come in and do Kaizen to help you tweak what might not have been perfect. Make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I really like this approach.
So I'll break into each one a little bit to go into a little more detail. So in this evaluate phase, I'm just going to be frank. I'm not going to be able to work with everybody to bring them here, right? If they don't have the culture in place, if they don't have a leadership team that's willing to work together to build this PSYOP team and the PSYOP process, I can't help them, right? So in this evaluate phase, I work with them to understand where are they today with their culture, with their core competencies, with their leadership. And then if that's all doing well, and when I say doing well, if that's well aligned to be able to support this type of activity, then we can go ahead and start the Zen sales to shipment system. So I have a scorecard that I created, and you can imagine, you flunk this test if you don't have culture, if you don't have leadership, right? And if your quality
Mhm.
isn't at a certain standard. So if you have those three things, you're going to have 85% or better. If you don't have those three things, you can't possibly get a good score. So it's a score that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's really just designed to say, I'm going to give you feedback on why Kaizen hasn't been working for you or lean hasn't been working for you. And you can make excuses to say it's because I'm not a car, because we're not making
Mhm.
cars or whatever other excuse. But honestly, if those three fundamentals aren't in place, culture, leadership, and quality, you're never going to see it. So that's what I cover in the evaluate phase. And some people can choose to just say, hey, Nicole, can you do this evaluation? And then they have no desire to go any further. They just want to try to understand where they sit.
Mhm.
Part of this evaluation phase, I'm going to do the demand analysis and the part family analysis. So they're going to get a benefit out of it, where I'm going to tell them, here's your part families, here's what your demand looks like now, in the next 6 months, in the next few years, and here's where you should be focusing improvements on. Even if they don't want to go the full boat into the Zen sales to shipment system, it's going to help them a lot. So that's the first phase. So then the Institute PSYOP phase, it's kind of obvious. But what's not obvious is I'm going to have them name a steering committee. So that goes along with the leadership piece of it to say, who has to nod in agreement for things to happen here? Who are the key stakeholders that have to be nodding in agreement for anything to happen in this business? Typically, it's finance, it's sales, it's operations, and then design or whoever's running engineering. Those four usually at a minimum have to come together in agreement for things to happen. So that's typically who would be on that steering committee. And these would be the highest level leaders in the company. And of course, the CEO. But then that steering committee would name the sales inventory and operations planning team. So who from the team do you want to see meeting on a regular basis to make sure that they're taking the pulse of what's going on in the factory, taking the pulse of what's happening out in the marketplace, and making sure those are well connected, and all the actions that we're taking are in support of that. So those folks will be identified. And then I'll actually work with that team to construct their PSYOP process. And I'll have to do a lot of training with them so that they themselves have a high level of understanding. I don't want to say expertise, but high level of understanding of the lean activity that we're going to be doing. And then they'll be involved every step of the way with the rest of the system being put into place. So this is that core team that's going to be involved throughout the process. Any questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask you on the PSYOP team, who are like if by job title, like who are the positions that you need to be there? Like if you saw a client recommend some people and you see them like they left out maybe like the operations guy or gal, like what would be like the different areas or departments that like really need to be represented to make that successful?
So it would be whoever is heading up the tactical portion of sales. So it could be the VP of sales. It depends on how hands-on that person is. With smaller companies, typically the VP of sales will do a lot more than in a larger company. But basically, the steering committee will say who is going to be the person that's going to be in charge, empowered to make decisions, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be the highest level person in the company. They just have to be empowered, and in the trenches. And the same thing for operations and the same thing for engineering. Usually you'll have quality there, but quality, it's not as important to have quality at that level. It's really sales, operations, and engineering. And the reason for engineering is because they're making new products. You don't want them doing that in the vacuum, right? So if they're working on a product that you can't sell, they need to stop what they're doing, right? They can't be
Gotcha.
siloed. Excuse me, I think I'm getting a cold.
So it's really even beyond just operations. It's really even for future products and just overall business.
Yes. Because it's I didn't create the name sales inventory and ops planning. I'm kind of
Mhm.
tying into what exists already in industry, but I'm communicating a best practice of what this is and what this can't be. There's a lot of PSYOP teams out there that aren't doing this at the level that I'm going to be developing with my clients. So that's part of my niche, right?
Mhm.
So for strategy or strategize, the PSYOP teams trained to perform the standard work analysis of the company to identify the part families and demand patterns. So what I'm trying to do is my motto, my mission, if you will, is to teach leaders at all levels to do what I do. You know what I mean? They don't have to have 20 years of experience to be able to do what I do once I teach them the right way. A lot of the reasons why it took me so long is because of the way I was taught by that consulting firm, right? They taught me
Mhm.
to almost go around blind, figuring it out, bumping into things, right? But I'm sharing my learning curve with the people that I'm teaching. So they're going to come up to speed a lot faster. And I've already done this many times, so I know it works, and I know the method that the methodology that I do is repeatable and trainable. So that steering committee and PSYOP team will develop a criteria selection matrix. In that criteria selection matrix, I mean, I can come in there with my expertise and say, okay, we need to look at on-time delivery. We need to look at, sales per employee, et cetera. I don't want to be dictating all the metrics. I'm going to recommend a few, but I'm going to say, what are the metrics that are important to you and your company, right? And where do you want to see them? What are your goals for these? So now take a look at all of your products that you're making. Like, for example, let's say one of their goals is they want their minimum margins to be 30%, on a product. Now I just came from the electronics industry and the margins were ridiculous, anywhere from 50 to 100%, right?
Yeah.
Crazy. I came from, jet engine manufacturer where I think they were negative margins because, because you had to sell so many before you had a payback. I think it was an 11-year payback. It's ridiculous. But yeah, so every company's goals is going to be different. So, I'll just help them identify and make sure everything's included. And I'll drag that out of the team. You know what I mean? To make sure everybody's been heard and collectively they come up with this criteria selection matrix. Then I'll help them see, well, here's all your part families, right? Engineering will have a big piece of that. They know what the part families are because they're designing the product, right? But I'll
Mhm.
help them to see, well, that's okay that you designed it that way, but how are we making it, right? So it's a combination of engineering and operations on the way that they make the product that's going to determine if it's in a family or not. And I mean, I have whole training where I cover, how to develop part families. But there's a repeatable, I don't want to say easy, it's easy for me, right? But I'm going to call it an easy, repeatable process to discover what your part families are and then determine if they can all go down the same line, same cell, whatever. So after this exercise, we'll know the part families and which ones are more important. So let's say the company only has one part family. Well, it's kind of easy. This doesn't even have to be done, right? If they
Mhm.
have several, then you're going to have a priority order of, which ones should we be focusing on first. And then I'll work with that company to say, okay, so let's say we have five. Do you have the time and the funds to go after putting all five in place? Because they're not going to all go down on one line. We're going to be doing five production lines. And if they say, yes, we want to do it all, then we'll put the whole plan together. Right. But typically, a client will hire me to do one part family at a time and then rehire me when they're ready to do the next one. If they haven't figured out how to do it without me. I really hope that I'm leaving a legacy of they don't need me, and they'll just hire me to do Kaizen occasionally, or maybe help train up some of the new folks. But that's the goal is, I'll do as much as they want up front. And then over time they're just like asking me to do Kaizen. So then the transform phase is the SIOP team and department cell form a larger team that performs the seller line design. So now let's say there was 5 different part families, and one of the part families represented there's already a core team in place that works on those products. It might be that what we're coming up with is so brand new that maybe a handful of people out of 5 different teams will come together to create this new department cell. So we'd identify that, we'd pull those people together, and now they work with the SIOP team to do the transformation. Excuse me. Any questions at this point?
No, it all makes sense. So yeah, you have to expand the team because you're probably bringing in like maintenance people or bringing in people that have to actually do some physical infrastructure and maybe some inventory control and scheduling.
Yep, and even the people that are producing the products, so
Oh, okay.
the assemblers, the testers. All right, so it's a full cross-functional team. So then once those layouts are prepared, the steering committee will help them down select to a final layout. Then the team will work with finance facilities to put a full return on investment budget and timeline in place for the layout that everybody agrees on. And then once that's approved, I'll teach them how to do earned value management. So the steering committee can regularly meet with the team at intervals to ensure that the implementation is staying on track to the timeline and the budget. So then at this point, I will be working with the client the whole way until everything's fully implemented. And then I'll include one Kaizen event at the end because I know there's going to be tweaking required, because there's always hidden factory that the best efforts always have something that you couldn't see until you actually put it in place, right? And but from my experience, and I mean every single time, those changes were minor, very minor. But if you don't address them, the whole thing could unravel. Because think about what you're doing. You're putting something brand new into place. You've ruffled a lot of feathers to do this, right? And
Mhm.
if even one little thing is going wrong, there's going to be negativity that you don't want to get in like a cancer and ruin what you've invested. So, and I can give you an example of this real quick. I did a major transformation in it was United Technologies Aerospace Systems. It used to be Hamilton Sundstrand. And all the folks that I interacted with were part of it. They were involved, they loved it, but there was one guy, one guy that wasn't happy with it. He did not want to move into the new position where he was going to be located. And because of his particular expertise, he really didn't have a choice in the matter. The new layout made a lot more sense because they had a test cell that his product, the only product that he worked on, pushed into this test cell. And it used to be that they were all located in a space in a separate area, and there'd be so much part movement, and people movement to have that flow. So what the team did is we broke off that piece of the assembly and had that happening right in front of that test cell, so it would just flow into there. And he had to move into that other room. And his complaint, can you imagine? It's minor. So what do you think it was?
No, air conditioning or what?
Man, you
Too
nailed
hot in the
it.
bathroom?
You nailed it. And it wasn't that it didn't have air conditioning. It was the way the air conditioning was coming down was hitting him on top of the head. And he didn't like that. And so I was there, every step of the way while it was being implemented. And it was implemented in a week. So we do all this prep work, we lay it all out, but the actual implementation happened during a Kaizen week where I had maintenance on hand, et cetera, everybody ready to go. So maintenance had their full plan of what they were doing. I walk in, he's all upset, all upset. And I said, "What's wrong? Everything's in place." And he goes, "Yeah, the air conditioning is not working for me." So I called the maintenance guy and I said, "You're going to have to move that vent." "But we did everything you told us to do." I'm like, "Yeah, but he's not happy. It's moving." But I'm like, "No buts." I'm like, "We just totally shook this guy up." And I'm saying it right in front of him, right?
Yeah.
Shook this guy's world up. We're asking him to move and work in a completely different area, very foreign to him. And now he's got this annoying air conditioning hitting him on the top of the head. And he didn't have that before. How would you feel about that? He's like, "All right, we'll do it." So little stuff like that. How could I have predicted that, right? How could anybody
Right.
have predicted that?
Yeah.
So very minor things. So at this point, the system would be fully in place for the one part family. And if I'd worked with that client to have a contract where we were doing multiple, after that first one's in place, that's when we'd start with the next one. So I would never do them at the same time. Far too disruptive. And there's learning that happens when you do this, right?
Mhm.
And once you put one in place and tweak it, you might do things differently with the second one and the third one, et cetera, that might make it go a lot faster. And it could be just learning, how maintenance interacts with something. Maybe we needed to outsource this piece of it because it takes too long to do it with our own people. Those type of lessons learned. So any questions at this point before I move on?
Yeah, I mean, it all really like the flow, and it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I'll just be quiet and continue. This is great.
Okay. So what are the attributes of a Zen production system? Have you ever seen anything like this before?
I mean, it looks like a layout and a process flow. Um, you got different product families going in and out of the operation.
So right here it says standard worksheet. Have you heard of that?
Familiar with standard work, but not familiar with the standard worksheet.
So standard worksheet is not as well known as it should be for as many people who have studied Toyota. You'll hear people say, "Okay, yeah, we did our standard worksheet, we understood how things were, and then we kind of threw it away, or we didn't look at it." And it's like, no, 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 no. Your standard worksheet defines what it's going to take to maintain flow to tack time. So if I look in here and I see these pieces here, which are called standard work in process, it tells me in order to maintain flow to tack time, there always has to be 4 pieces in this cell. So if I were a high level manager or any level manager, and I walk through here and I don't see 4 pieces in that cell, I know something's wrong. So it creates the standard for what it's going to take to always be on time and to schedule. And it's a visual factory. This is the true 5S. So you'll hear people talk about, well, does my stapler have to go here and be labeled?
Yeah.
Copier have to be there and be. This is 5S, right? This is visual factory.
Gotcha.
So if if those four parts had to be in the cell at all time to maintain flow to tack time, what does that mean? That means that a tack time goes by, this red part in inspect goes out, this part in deburr moves to inspection, this part in hone moves to deburr, and this part that was in drill moved to hone, and then this part here that was outside of the cell now comes into the drill position. So every tack time, the parts have to advance, right? So in order to enable that, you have to have leveled production. Everything has to be at the same rate, right? Which is tack time. So once this is all designed and this cell is in place, it's just a matter of running it that way. So these four smiley faces represent the number of people that you need to maintain flow. And then I don't know if you've ever heard of the standard work combination sheet, which I don't cover here because it's a quick review. The work that they have to do in order to keep those products moving through there is captured in the standard work combination sheet. So you have a standard work combination sheet for every single operator required in the standard worksheet. So in this case, you'd have 4 standard work combination sheets.
Okay.
So then what are the colors? So the colors represent different products. In this particular cell, there's 3, A, B, and C. They represent a part family. Just the fact that they can all be produced in the same cell makes them a part family. So this EPEI stands for every part, every interval. So I always tell folks, this is basic math. You know, there's people that are making a lot of money on whole mixed model events, or use my mixed model software, use my mixed model calculator. It's like, guys, it's basic ratios, right? It's like if you look at the demand and compare it, right? In this particular instance, for every 6 A's that you have to produce 3 B's and 1 C. And so picture the PSYOP team now, right? So that PSYOP team knows this cell exists, knows what part families go through it, and they know that EPEI is set at this rate. So for every 10 pieces that are coming out of that cell, there's going to be 6 A's, 3 B's, 1 C. This could completely flip the other way, right? And if that does, the PSYOP team would then have to meet and say, is this going to affect the cell? What do you think the answer is?
I mean, would each of these have possibly different operations and time it takes to go through it, or
So
is each of these products has the same tack time as it's going through the system?
So by definition, the fact that these parts are all in this same cell and part of the same part family, they all take the same amount of time.
Okay.
They
So it's
all
really just the demand. It's really just what customers are ordering A, B, or C. But from an operations standpoint, you're producing. So really, the reflection, the 631 is just really this is what customers are ordering right now. Operation wise, you're still pushing 10 units.
And they call this Hijunka. So once you design a cell by part family, do you see the huge advantage you have? Do you know how many people are out there doing one piece flow cells for one part number? I want to shoot them. Why would you do that?
You know? That's because it's easy. That's how they do it.
So many things that are wrong, right? Because not only do you lose that flexibility of, I mean, think about it. You're using the same amount of people to do 3 products, right? And what gets in the way of doing that is design. So if they're not designing for commonality with their products, they're going to have a ton of part families, because what they really have is they don't have part families, right? So if they're really designing by part family and saying, okay, we want this new microchip to come through and it's going to be 80% similar, but it's going to have this added nuance on either in the beginning, middle, or end. If they are 80% common in their process steps, they're the same part family. And you can do a minor tweak to the cell and make it fit in. right? So that's why part of that PSYOP team engineering has to be there, because if they're out designing stuff, they could be designing stuff that costs too much, can't be produced in the same cell, right? It's going to be major disruptive, to the factory's ability to perform optimally. So this is it, basically. This is my expertise. I happen to be one of the few in the world that focused and studied hard on standard work to the point where I can apply it to anything. And a lot of folks are getting it wrong. And that's why lean efforts fail, because they're not lean efforts, right? They're not creating a system. They're not optimizing, like really truly optimizing what they're doing. So once this is in place, even if the takt time changes, right, they can respond to that. So the takt time is set by the available time divided by the demand. So if their demand goes up significantly, right, it's in the denominator, what happens to the takt time? It goes down. You have less time, right? So what you'd have to do is say, okay, well, how's that going to impact us? Well, every one of your processes are at or below takt time. So everything now has to improve if that's the case. So what I do with the clients is we will look way into the future of what we think is going to happen with the demand. And, you can only do so much, right? But you take your best shot to say, this is what's going to happen. And then you get that high demand, the middle demand, and the low. And we'll calculate the takt for each of those three scenarios. And I'll help them design a cell to the best of our ability that can meet all three of those. So, so basically, if your cell can meet the fastest takt time, which has the, when I say fastest, it's the least amount of time, right? So your takt time is going by quickly. So for example, Toyota has a 55-second takt time, right? That represents millions of cars going through. Let's say they drop that down by half. Now it's going to double their takt time. So they have double the time to do it. They can pull a bunch of people out of their line, right? You can say, okay, well, this person, instead of just doing this process, they can do this one and still meet takt time. So do you see how in this cell you can make those changes? So if I were to design this so everything was as level as it could be, I could, when the takt time, when the demand drops and the amount of time that you have increases, you can take two of these people out. Right. And when you take them out, you've got to use them someplace else.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. But basically, each station has a certain takt time, and depending on how you staff it, one person could do two stations, and that doubles the time it takes to go through. But if your demand is down, that might be the right solution. So yeah, no, that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, basically, you got that you call the Zen system, so everything is in harmony. And then you just turn it up or turn it down as you need, but basically everything is coordinated because of the takt time. Yeah, I mean, we have the Toyota Tundra and Tacoma plant here in San Antonio, and I've toured that plant before, and it's and you're 100% right. It's just like seeing that, every 55 seconds, here comes a truck rolling off the line, and the whole factory is built. So every station is 55 seconds, and that's the standard we're all chasing.
Yep. And but it's very rare that a company is going to have a moving line. You have to have really high volume to justify the expense it costs for that. In most cases, I mean, I've seen a moving line put in place in a couple of aerospace businesses where it's moving really slow, right? But, and it didn't cost a lot of money to put it in place, but what a game changer, because once it starts moving, the whole way you address it is different, right? Now it's like, oh, physically where I locate this, it's not going to be there anymore. I have to have those tools over here. I have to have this bench over here. You have to align things where they need to be. So when you have a stationary place like this, now you're moving the people to the work, right?
Right.
So the people are ensuring that the work is advancing. And that's why this standard worksheet is so important when you don't have a moving line, because how else are you going to see, that it's performing? You should be able to look at the standard worksheet, look in the cell and say, great, I can go away, or something's wrong, right? You guys were supposed to work to a faster tack time, and I can see that you're not working to standard work A or standard work B or whatever it is.
Mhm. No, it
So
makes sense, and I think that's the lesson that I get out of here. Is like you can apply this even if you don't have this, assembly line going down, moving assembly line, single flow going down. It's really the single flow of the operations throughout the process.
there hasn't been a single transformation that I did that had a moving line.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I've done all the difficult ones. So basically a seller aligned standard work ensures that the standard working process flows to tack time every time. The adjustable demand sequence, which gets controlled by the SIOP team and adjusted by the SIOP team, is put in place via Hijunka using every part, every interval. And then the point of use materials required, you'll have to have Kanban in place to make sure that the cell doesn't stop because it runs out of materials, right? I like to work with a company to have at least a month's worth of materials right there on hand. That way, if they have a problem, they know they're covered for a month, right? We're okay for a month. Let's work really hard now with our other teams that are working on resolving the issue so that if we have to, go to another supplier, if we have to go to an alternate, whatever, we have a month before we're depleted and have to switch over. And then having an adjustable cell that can support multiple tack times makes it, again, another lever for the SIOP team to use for when customer demand changes. But also something to consider here that a lot of companies don't get to take advantage of. You hear of a lot of companies that wanted to shut down like during the summer for a week or two.
Mhm.
And that's typically to do the big maintenance items where they can't have people working there when they do them. And there's other reasons too, but they worry about, how are we going to get all the requirements out the door and do the shutdown, because it's just not going to work when you've got the hockey stick going on. So with the adjustable tack time, what you could do is you could ramp it up, right? You could in advance have more materials than you need coming in for Kanban, right? And then you could work to a faster tack time fictitiously, right? To put material on the shelf, if you will, and then have the people go out on vacation and do the shutdown. And then when they come back in and they restart, you're fine. You actually got ahead, and you were still able to ship everything on time. So it gives you complete flexibility across the board. So this was really great having just you here. It got really interactive. Usually I go through a lot more of this without questions. But do you have time since we're running over a little bit?
Yeah, no, that time.
Okay, I'm going to go into a case study to show, one of the customers I actually implemented this at. So the before situation with this particular customer is they were 80% on time. And I'm sure you can appreciate those 20% of customers weren't very happy, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Nobody can get away with 80% on time delivery. So that's pretty poor. And the way that they had their department laid out is there were multiple duplicate rows of the same exact layout, where it's just assembly bench, test bench, assembly bench, test bench, but there were no standards. It was basically Joe sits here, Dave sits there. You know what I mean? People were married to their work area as if it was their desk, like as if an office worker had a desk. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It was their area, which is a recipe for disaster, because you really want, Deming talks about you need to get it down to a few degrees of freedom, right? In order to control the quality. So the more degrees of freedom that you're adding, the less repeatability you're going to have. Built in, you're going to have quality issues, So basically they had it set up for failure for quality, and they had an awful lot of customer returns coming back, which is the worst, right? If it's escaping out to the customer, that's bad. So that hurts your reputation, that it creates the worst of waste, right? Having to not just rework it, but figure out what went wrong, and finding out so late in the game, it's hard to make fixes that really make a difference. It could be they returned it a month later. Well, geez, do you remember what you did a month ago? No. So that's basically what they had. High returns. Their first pass yield within the cell, within where they're working, was at 50%.
Wow.
And basically what I observed was either it was going to pass test immediately, or it was going to iterate multiple times to get it to pass. And sometimes it would have to go off into a troubleshoot area where it would never come back because they never figured it out. So that's what we inherited. Now, when you look at that, would you think that I'd have to go now and spend forever on quality to make it better?
Oh yeah, so in my experience, if you're getting 50% in your internal first pass testing, you got some serious quality problems. That means a lot's escaping to the customer.
Right.
That is really really bad. Yeah.
So remember, I come in and I do the evaluate, right? So in this particular case, when I saw that people were married to their area and there was no standardization, I was saying to myself, they're lucky to have that. They're lucky to have the 50% with what's going on here. So I knew that the quality was based on what they were doing, right? And once they put the standards in place, it should go up pretty high. And it did. So it really depends on, if that wasn't the case, if they were, had gone the traditional 5S path and everybody was like working in the same type of bench scenario and people were getting trained the same, then you say, oh, there's something else here. They're not ready for me. You know what I mean? But in this particular case, because of the reasons for the quality, I was able to still help them.
So you could identify like the root cause was the way that they structured their manufacturing. So
yeah, they were just they were leaving it up to chance. It was loosey goosey. They weren't tightening the quality at all. So
sadly, it happens more than people think.
And they were like a high tech, high engineering company, and those engineers, they really lacked the understanding of this. They were like, we designed this to work well. I don't understand what's going on. And
honestly, to add to that, like I have definitely experienced that firsthand and seen it happen where engineering has that idea. It's like, well, just make it to print. I don't care how you build it, just make it to print. And they don't realize is all of these workmanship manufacturing things that occur. And that's why like your approach, you gotta have engineering involved because they're having that just make it to print. Here's the specifications. You end up having problems down the road.
Exactly. So they thought, the quality issues had something more to it. And, you know, they knew something was wrong with the manufacturer, but they didn't realize it was this. And they were open enough to say, I think we're doing something wrong. You know what I mean? Which they weren't. So they were constantly sending people down to the troubleshooting area to try to understand what they could do to make improvements to the design. But they could never figure it out because they had this month lag, right? Where they're getting their feedback loop. So anyway, the strategy was, we realized it and realized this the biggest amount of time took with coming up with the part families, because they had done nothing to create part families. So it was a huge matrix that I filled out, you know, working with the team leader. And I had to tell the rest of the team, camp out for a while. I'm going to work directly with the team leader. We're going to keep working on the process matrix until these part families fall out. And they will. They'll eventually fall out. It took forever because it was so complicated. And then finally, we just kept refining it. And then we had a couple of aha moments and found that there were 3 part families. And then when I presented this, I was presenting every month to the leadership team. When I presented this, they came back and said, we want a 4th part family. And I'm like, what's that 4th part family? Returns. And I'm like, well, if you need a 4th part family, I'm not doing my job. Right? Because those returns have to go away. And they said, well, we're going to be dealing with them for at least a little while. So they'd feel more comfortable if we had a returns cell. So it became part of the strategy, was to make sure that we had a returns cell. But I already knew, you know, because I can see the future better than they can in this particular scenario, that we were going to steal that operator. You know?
Right.
So when I gave them an idea of how many people they were going to need, actually it was less than what they had, so it worked out. But I said, you know, you're going to be able to pull that person over. Because what they were doing is, I can't tell too much information because, you know, I've signed NDAs with all of my clients. I'm not giving you their name, but even so, they had brand new products coming in and they were hiring. And I told them right up front, stop, wait, let's do this analysis because you're going to need less people most likely. So, and that's exactly what happened. So then the cell design. So the constraints were they wanted to use the existing footprint. And there was another constraint that I'll explain in a second here, where it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of precision involved with delivering the testing power. And I think they also had air and other things that were coming in to fuel the test stand. So they did not want to disrupt that. And honestly, I didn't either, because that could impact the quality, right? So we had to, the limitation where all the testing had to be against the wall, this one wall. Okay. But we basically would have one major cell with these 4 mini cells. And then I basically said, we'll take 10 months to implement it. We ended up doing it in less than that because it was supposed to go from January to October. We didn't start till April. So because they weren't ready. And we still finished on time in October. So anyway, this is the cell. And these are the test stands that are all forced against the same wall. So it disrupts the flow very slightly, but because of the part families now broken out, it wasn't very disruptive at all. So for example, for cell 1, it goes assembly 1, test 1, assembly 2, test 2. There's only one person working here, so it's not hard for him or her to go assembly test, right? It's just a matter of them turning their seat around, right? And then in this cell, there were 6 steps to make this part. And it would go assembly 1, test 1, assembly 2, test 2, test 3, test 4. And when we did the math, basically, which I won't get into now, but there's simple math that I repeatedly can apply to figure out how many people they need and how many pieces of standard work in process they need. Um, and then that gets slightly tweaked to make sure flow is enabled. So if I have to add a person or add a piece of standard work in process because of the way a layout is to better enable flow, I'll do that. So the equations aren't precise like that. So anyway, this particular cell, 3 people, 3 pieces of work in process to maintain flow to tack time. And then here we had 1 person here for returns, which there's no way that they were going to be there. In fact, by the time I left, they were already out of business, if you will. And now this person, they had ramped up. This was their highest volume cell. And we specifically broke it out so that it could flex from 1 person to 2 person easily and fit the second person in the cell. So by design, we made it so that 2 people could work in here. And obviously, that doubled the output when you added the second person. So we stole this guy. And then cell 3 is right here. And this was a really simple assembly clean. There wasn't much going on here for these parts. And it doesn't say it here, but basically this is a sub-assembly part that's going into one of these parts. And that's why. But it's different. It's a different part film, right? So it had to be pulled out of here. So this was the layout. Again, went in place in like 8 months, 7 or 8 months. Wait a minute. February, March. So yeah, 7 months we had it in place. Any questions about that?
No, it makes a lot of sense. I love this example because you have that constraint of having to share that wall for all the test sites, but it just really shows, how you can still design a very efficient flow through the process, even if you're working within the space that you have.
Mm-hmm. And basically what they had going on here is they had a kitting area. So they had kitting, but they didn't have any requirements on the people that were kitting, how fast they had to put the kits together and which part families they were supposed to do, which parts. So they would have, they'd have, like, for example, this part needed a sub-assembly of this C3, right? Well, they'd have everything to go, all the details to build a C1 except for the C3. So all the details that would go into the C3, they couldn't even start it. So now it's just they have all this inventory on a cart taking up space, but they can't start it because it's missing some key element. So
and everybody's really busy, right? And that's the thing. That's
exactly.
C1's like C3, I need that part.
Yeah. So once we set this in place, it was staggering, again, a breakthrough transformation. So so basically this is it. And I called it Zen Sales to Shipments because I wanted to be able to make part of what I'm providing clients is doing it right from the beginning. When I actually worked with this particular client, I didn't make sure they had SIOP in place. That was a lesson learned from this client because I can't give too much detail, but by the time we were done, we realized that they had miscalculated the demand. So the scenario where they would need 2 people here didn't exist. And they were able to pull this guy over to the other new area that they were developing. But I'm like, wow, if you had a SIOP team, that wouldn't have happened. And so, so I tweaked the business the second time around coming into business to say, you know what, I'm going to make sure they're doing that right up front.
I think it's really clever because I think most companies just operate in silos, and when you have numbers like this, when you don't have on-time delivery, the salespeople are looking at the operation folks and they're like, what can we do to help you? And this is exactly what they can do to help them, is actually be part of the process and give actionable insight and data into what's going on.
So once this was put in place, they were at 100% on-time delivery. They actually were able to eliminate a shift. I don't like to
Mhm.
really broadcast that one, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I mean, they had too many people, they're working too many hours, burning everybody out because of waste,
yeah.
So, and it's like, I know generically everybody talks about waste, but it's much more than that. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
some waste is okay, right? It depends
Mhm.
on where that waste is, you know. You could have Kanban where you've got more inventory than you really need. It's like, well, you know what? Wyman Gordon blew up, right?
Mhm.
And because we had that extra inventory, we were okay, you know?
Exactly.
So it's
No,
like,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% right. I mean, there's a lot of these concepts that get misused, and again, when I ran operations, like similar approach that I had when it came to like I would really study like the takt time of each operation and try to balance it so that we could produce the most. Not in nowhere near the really comprehensive approach that you have, but like just as the leader of the plant, like I totally get that. That's the fundamentals to that coordinated flow.
as when you're running the area, it's hard to get this intricate. You really need a
Mhm.
consultant coming in to help you. You know,
Absolutely.
I was able to, when I was director of manufacturing, I did one of my best transformations, but it was in a heat treat area and I could do it in 5 days. If I had to,
Mhm.
I was exhausted after that 5 day event because I'm running the whole facility and being the sensei for this team, right?
Mhm.
So it was exhausting. If I had to do that for everything, there's, yeah, I'd be dead. There's only so much energy you have. So it wasn't just a gratuitous plug for myself to make sure that I get hired. It's actually a reality that I've tried to do this as I'm a leader. And it's like you need the leader to understand how to do this, right? So that they can
Mhm.
support it, but you still need somebody else um that can physically work with the teams and help pull this stuff off.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's different when you're in it than when you can look at it from the outside and really, even though you're going to be very involved in this process, hands on throughout it, but it's just it's a little bit different than when you're working with all the personnel issues getting through, and
Right.
when those quality issues become real personal. When you're answering the phone call from the sales team or customer. So it's a lot. It's a lot to manage on the day to day to then have this, ability
Exactly.
to really design. Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting, and also just like the way you explain it is like it's like I get it. Like it's a very smart process. Like it's
Thank you.
yeah. I think the most return for your investment. You do this, and yeah, I mean it'll pay for itself forever. I mean, that's the
Exactly.
very systematic, yeah, comprehensive approach. Very cool.
Thanks.